Let's go, Hayes. Move it. Get your hands off me. Keep walking, no trouble. This is bullshit.
Two security guards walked an old man across a marble lobby, a cardboard box in his arms, his badge already flashing red on the turnstile screen behind him. His name was Walter Hayes. He had cleaned this building for 11 years, and in 11 years, no one had ever needed two guards to walk him anywhere. The elevator doors opened. A woman stepped out mid-sentence, still talking to the assistant beside her, her heels striking the marble, in the confident rhythm of someone who owned every room she walked into. She was the new CEO. Her name was Melissa Cole, and she had been in the job exactly 6 days. She stopped talking. She stopped walking. Her eyes had landed on Walter's wrist, on a small crescent-shaped mark just below his palm, the kind of mark you'd only recognize if you had spent your whole life searching for it. Her voice came out as barely more than breath.
Dad?
Dad? The lobby went silent. Somewhere behind her, a phone camera lifted. Walter did not look relieved to be recognized. He looked like a man who had just watched 30 years of careful hiding collapse in 4 seconds, and he looked, more than anything, afraid. Why would the woman who now ran a billion-dollar company call a janitor being escorted out in disgrace her father? What did she know standing in that lobby that no one else in the building had ever been told? And why, when he finally had the one thing he might have wanted for 3 decades, did Walter Hayes look like a man bracing for punishment instead of a reunion? We'll get to all of it. But first, before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to subscribe to StoryMind so you never miss another unforgettable story. Now, back to Walter. To understand what happened in that lobby, you have to go back further than that morning. You have to go back 11 years, to the day Walter Hayes first put on a grey uniform and picked up a mop, in a building he had once helped design as a structural engineer with his name on the blueprints filed in the basement archive. Nobody in that building knew that. Walter had made sure of it. He lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, in a building with a stubborn radiator and a landlord who liked him. He kept one photograph on his nightstand, of a woman named Ruth, his wife, gone 9 years now. He arrived at the office 2 hours before anyone else, not because he had to, but because those 2 hours were his. He liked the quiet. He liked knowing every hallway before the noise of the day filled it. The night security guard, a younger man named Marcus, was the closest thing Walter had to a friend, and even Marcus didn't know the real reason Walter always found an excuse to clean the executive floor himself. The reason was simple, and Walter had never said it out loud to another living soul. 11 months earlier, a photograph had been posted on the company's internal newsletter, celebrating the appointment of a rising executive named Melissa Cole to senior vice president. Walter had stood in the break room holding that printed newsletter until his hands went still, staring at a face he recognized instantly, though he had only seen it once before, 35 years earlier, for 11 minutes, in a hospital room he was not proud of. He had cut that photograph out. He kept it folded behind Ruth's picture in his wallet. He told himself over and over that watching from a distance was enough, that she had a life, a name, a family who loved her, and that showing up now would only take something from her, not give her anything back. He never counted on the possibility that she might already be looking for him. 3 floors above, where Walter mopped hallways at 5 in the morning, Melissa Cole was living a very different version of the same unanswered question. She had been adopted at 3 months old by a couple in Ohio who never hid the truth from her, who told her from childhood that she was chosen, that she was loved, that where she came from didn't change who she was. It was a kind and generous thing to tell a child. It didn't stop her, at 39 years old, running one of the fastest-growing firms in the country, from lying awake some nights wondering about 2 people she had never met. 6 months before that morning in the lobby, she had done something she'd never told anyone about, not even her adoptive parents. She had hired a private investigator to look into her closed adoption records. The report had come back 4 weeks ago. It sat in the bottom drawer of her desk, still unopened, because some truths are easier to almost have than to actually hold. She had no idea the man named in that report had been cleaning her office every morning for nearly a year. The story might have stayed that way, two lives circling each other in the same building without ever touching, if not for what happened on a Tuesday night in October, when Walter Hayes was restocking supplies in the office of the company's chief operating officer, a sharp, controlled man named Gary Fenn. Gary had left in a hurry that evening, and he had left a folder open on his desk. Walter wasn't the type to pry, but a name caught his eye, a vendor he didn't recognize attached to a wire transfer with more zeros than any legitimate invoice should carry. Dated the same quarter, the company had quietly reported an unexplained loss in its shareholder letter. Walter had spent 30 years reading blueprints and structural reports. He knew how to recognize when numbers didn't add up, even numbers that weren't his to look at. He took out his phone. He photographed 3 pages. He told himself it was nothing, that he'd forget about it by morning, that a janitor poking around a COO's private files was a fast way to lose the only steady thing he had left in his life. He did not forget about it by morning, and neither did the building's security system, which logged an after-hours badge swipe into Gary Fenn's office at 9:47 that night. Gary Fenn found out about that badge swipe before his coffee had gone cold the next day. He didn't know what had been seen. He didn't know what had been taken. He only knew that someone had been in that office who shouldn't have been, and that the timing could not have been worse. The board was scheduled to vote that same week on whether to approve an internal audit Gary had been quietly delaying for 2 years. He walked into human resources that morning and said one sentence to the director, a woman named Dana Reyes. "Let the janitor go. Today, no conversation, no notice period. I want him out before noon." Dana had run Walter's file before lunch. 11 years of service. Not one incident, not one complaint, not one late clock-in. She asked Gary why. He didn't answer her. He simply repeated the deadline, and something in his voice told her not to ask again. By 10:30 that morning, 2 security guards were standing at Walter's supply closet with a termination form and a cardboard box. Walter didn't argue. He didn't ask why. In some strange way, packing that box felt like the ending he had always quietly expected, the price of getting too close to a life that was never supposed to include him. He placed his few things inside it, a spare uniform, a coffee mug Ruth had given him, and his wallet, still holding that folded photograph he had carried for 11 months. He had no way of knowing that the woman in that photograph was about to walk off an elevator and change everything in the next 30 seconds. When Melissa recognized the mark on Walter's wrist, it wasn't luck. The investigator's report she still hadn't opened had come with a physical description page, one she had finally forced herself to read 3 nights earlier at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep. A small crescent-shaped birthmark, left wrist, present since birth. She had read that line so many times it had burned itself into her memory before she ever expected to use it. Standing in that lobby, watching a security escort lead an elderly janitor toward the door, she hadn't been looking for anything. And then she saw his wrist, and 11 months, 35 years, and one entire unopened folder collapsed into a single word. "Dad?" Gary Fenn was watching from the mezzanine above the lobby when it happened. He watched his new CEO, the woman he'd have to answer to for the rest of his career, freeze in front of the very man he had just ordered removed from the building. In that instant, Gary understood something that hadn't occurred to him an hour earlier. Firing Walter Hayes hadn't erased a problem. It had placed the one person who might expose him directly in front of the one person in this company with the power to bury his career entirely. Melissa turned to the guards.
Let
him go, she
Yes,
said,
ma'am.
quiet but absolute. Then, to Walter, her voice cracking for the first time since she'd stepped off that elevator. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" The lobby, full of employees who had stopped to watch, went completely still, waiting for an answer nobody there was prepared to hear. They spoke behind closed doors, in her office. On the top floor, Walter had cleaned nearly every morning, for the better part of a year, without ever once letting himself linger too long by her desk. He told her the truth in full, for the first time in his life, out loud, to another human being. He told her about Ruth, and about the year everything fell apart, a diagnosis, a treatment that drained every account they had, and then some. Medical debt, that followed them for years after the funeral. He told her that when Melissa was born, during the hardest stretch of that same crisis, he and Ruth had made a decision neither of them ever recovered from, choosing a closed adoption because Walter couldn't bear the idea of an open one, of watching his daughter grow up close enough to see and never close enough to hold. He told her that when he saw her name on the company newsletter 11 months ago, he applied for a janitorial position 2 weeks later, using a version of his resume that left off 30 years of engineering work because he needed a reason to be near her, even if she never knew why. And then, because it was the only thing he had that felt like it might matter more than an apology, he handed her his phone, open to 3 photographed pages from Gary Fenn's office. Melissa read them twice. Then she stood, and for the first time since she'd taken this job 6 days earlier, she looked less like a new executive finding her footing and more like someone who had just found the one piece of leverage strong enough to protect the company her father had quietly been trying to protect all along. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the board was called into an emergency session. The photographs matched a discrepancy the company's auditors had flagged 18 months earlier and never fully resolved. A shell vendor tied directly to accounts Gary Fenn controlled personally. Confronted with the documents, Gary didn't deny it. He resigned before the meeting ended, effective immediately, and the board opened a formal investigation into 2 years of transactions that would take months to fully unwind. Walter Hayes was reinstated that same week, though not to his old position. Melissa insisted, over his quiet objections, on a new title: Building Infrastructure Consultant, a role built specifically around the 30-year-old blueprints in the basement archive that had his name on them the entire time. He accepted. On one condition, he refused to budge on. Some mornings, he still wanted to clean the executive floor himself, because that floor was where he had first learned how to watch over his daughter from a distance, and old habits, even complicated ones, aren't always meant to be thrown away. Dana Reyes kept her job, though it took her a while to stop replaying that morning in her mind, wondering what would have happened if she'd pushed Gary Fenn harder, or gone over his head before noon instead of after. Melissa called her into the office the following week, not to reprimand her, but to ask her to help rewrite the company's termination policy so that no employee, at any level, could ever be removed again on a single executive's word alone, without review, without a paper trail, without someone like Dana having the standing to say no. Dana kept a printed copy of that new policy in her desk drawer, in the same spot where a report about her own father's whereabouts had once sat unopened for months. She never told anyone why it mattered to her the way it did. Marcus, the night security guard, found out the truth from the building's grapevine before Walter ever got around to telling him directly. When Walter finally sat him down to explain it properly, over coffee in the break room they'd shared 100 quiet mornings, Marcus just shook his head slowly and said he always figured Walter was hiding something. He just assumed it was something sadder, not something this big. The two of them still take their coffee at 5 in the morning. Walter says it's the one part of his old life he never wants to trade away, no matter what his new title says on the door. The board's investigation into Gary Fenn's dealings took the better part of 5 months to fully unwind. By the time it closed, the company had recovered a portion of the missing funds, tightened its financial oversight considerably, and brought in an outside auditor with a standing invitation to review the books twice a year instead of once. Gary was never charged criminally, the evidence falling just short of that threshold, but his name became one that no company in the industry would put anywhere near a boardroom again. He moved out of state within the year. Nobody at Coleridge Dynamics heard from him after that, and nobody went looking. 3 weeks after that day in the lobby, Melissa